So it's interesting. We know a lot about painting, and yet we can learn more. We can go deeper. And so that's what I wanted to talk about in this short video. So it's interesting because paint is basically pigment plus a binder. In modern times, we're able to add additives that keep it stable, or there might be a liquid. But the one consistent thing is that you take pigment and you suspend it in some sort of binder. So let's go ahead and do that. What I've got here is I've got some blue pigment I'm going to use. So pigments come from the earth. Pigments have been made from semi-precious stones. And nowadays, pigments are made through chemicals. But here are my pigments. I'm going to start with one of the older painting techniques. And for that, I will need an egg. One of the oldest paints is used kind of in the 14th century and 15th century is egg tempera, and it uses an egg. And so I'm going to get that ready for us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the egg. So I am going to crack it, and I'm going to separate the whites of the egg from the yolk. Why did they use this? We have to remember, they didn't have big factories with chemicals. So I've got the whites of the egg here and the yolk here. And I'm going to take a moment and clean my hands off. And what's interesting is artists would use the yolk. The yolk of the egg is the more stable part. So here's my binder, here's my pigment. And to make my paint, I just mix some pigment into my binder, stir it together, and I have made paint. And so I have pigment and binder and pigment and egg yolk. And so this would make a really beautiful paint. It's really clear. So artists who worked with egg tempera have to work in layers. They have to keep layering it on because this paint is in many ways transparent. It also dries really quickly. So unlike the way I just did it, of mixing a lot, you would mix it more in small batches. So here we are. Artists are working with egg tempera paint, and there's eventually a breakthrough. And that breakthrough still has pigment, but now we've got a different binder. We've got oil. So mixing pigment with oil creates oil paints. You can use pretty much any oil. So at home, if you have avocado oil, you could use that. What artists tend to use are things like walnut oil or linseed oil is probably the most used. And the reason why is because it's a very clear oil. So you're going to start seeing the same recipe. I'm going to have my pigment. And my binder. So this time it's oil. So right now I'm about to make oil paint. So I've got that combined, and I'll stir this together. This is basically when you go to the art store and you pick up a tube of oil paint, what you're getting. In the modern world, that's where the additives come in. companies now know chemistry, so they will put an additive so it won't separate, that it's stable. But fundamentally, it's pigment and oil. Something else that was kind of interesting during the Renaissance and something we'll study are the idea of frescoes. So frescoes are almost always painted on a wall, but why is it different than a mural? And it's different for this reason. It's different because the paint is actually impregnated. It's part of the wall. So I'm going to show you now a different idea. What would happen is that they would have basically a plaster, and they would mix the pigment into the plaster and paint that on the wall. They used basically, they would cook limestone until it becomes this very acidic, toxic lime slack. And then plaster the wall, and then work in small amounts. So there's quite a process to it. And so I'm not going to do that incredible process, but I'm just going to mimic enough of it so you can just get that feeling. I'm taking my plaster, which I can just go down to the hardware store and buy. I'm mixing it with water, and I'll get this sort of thick paste. So here it is, and it's actually a little thinner than I want. So I'm going to mix a little more plaster into it. So I've got my binder, plaster, and what do? I mix my pigment into it. So I'm getting this pigmented plaster. It becomes my paint. And so when I work this onto the wall, my paint is part of the wall. It makes up the wall. That's different than a mural when you just take paint and you just are painting on top of it. And it's kind of fun to know. It's why frescoes last so long, why we can go to Rome and even Greece and find frescoes. It's because it's literally what the wall's made out of. So for hundreds of years, paints didn't change from this. Then the revolution of chemistry occurred, and lots of bright different pigments were created, but also the idea of plastics. So sort of discovered in the 1930s was this idea of acrylic, but in the 1960s is when acrylic paint really took off. And so I'm going to take what I would call a liquid acrylic medium, and of course, put my pigment into it and make acrylic paint. Before I do, I want to show you something that's probably a little more familiar. Something else that I was affected by this chemistry was glue. Glue used to be made from animal parts, and that's not the case anymore. Basically now, our school glue is just sort of a liquid plastic, and it's sticky. I've got an acrylic medium that's for paints that's very similar. It's a liquid plastic. It's not made to be sticky, but it shares the same science. It's just sort of this liquid polymer. So here's my acrylic medium. I'll open this up, pour that out, and then same recipe really, binder plus pigment. And now what you've seen is I am making acrylic paint. So it's kind of fun to pull back the curtain of all these different kinds of paints you see in your art store and realize they're really just the same recipe. I could even make watercolors. However, for me, I don't have the binder. The binder for watercolor is gum arabic. It comes from a tree. It's the sap of a tree, and you can put your pigment in it, and then this sap dissolves in water, and yet will adhere to a paper. So whether it's oil paint, egg tempera, acrylic paint, frescoes, it's the same recipe. It's pigment plus some sort of binder. And knowing that can kind of give you just a different experience